Anyone who has spent 3 years as a research grind to earn a spot in a top-tier international lab knows the drill. The path is paved with late nights at the lab bench and brutal grillings by the PI in the conference room. Even if you land a paper in a premier journal or get recruited back home by your mentor, your family might still treat you like garbage. I was that rising star, the one with federal grant money that every top professor wanted. Yet on my very first day back in Boston, my fiancée dumped me like a backup plan, and my own brother framed me for a stabbing he staged himself. Everyone pointed fingers at me, calling me difficult and immature, but I was busy showing the police the hidden camera footage while my lawyer liquidated my shares. I have learned the hard way that while people will betray you, contracts and raw data are the only things that stay loyal. After 3 years as a visiting scholar abroad, I finally made it back to the States. Instead of a warm welcome, I found out my fiancé was sleeping with my older brother. I confronted them right then and there. Our argument in the hotel lobby grew increasingly heated until the shrill blast of a fire alarm cut through the air. As chaos erupted, Olivia shielded my brother, Ethan, and shoved him toward the emergency exit for safety. Someone suddenly tripped me from behind, sending my glasses flying. The entire world dissolved into a terrifying blur in an instant. Panic surged through me as I squinted through the thick, rolling smoke. I saw my parents rushing into the lobby. A surge of desperate hope flared up inside me. However, when they opened their mouths, they were screaming for Ethan, not me. It made no sense because I was their biological son while Ethan was the one they had adopted. When I finally opened my eyes, I was lying in a hospital bed. An agonizing, piercing pain was radiating up my left arm. Thick layers of gauze were wrapped around my hand. My family had simply abandoned me in that fire without a second thought. Now I was truly all on my own. The hospital room was eerily silent. Then, I heard footsteps approaching and the door was pushed open. "You are awake," a nurse said as she stood in the doorway, her voice crisp and professional. "How are you feeling?" "It still hurts a lot," I croaked. Without a word, she slid a thermometer under my arm. The cold probe made me flinch. "Where's my family?" I asked, my voice sounding like it had been scorched by flames. The nurse shrugged and told me she didn't know. A firefighter had carried me out of the building. They had tried calling my emergency contacts multiple times, but no one bothered to pick up. A bitter, hollow laugh escaped my throat. After what happened in that fire, their absence was actually exactly what I expected. I glanced at my phone on the nightstand. There was not a single missed call from any of them. I had been gone for 3 long years. To think I would return to find my life in such a state was devastating. How could this happen? Why was this happening to me? I threw the covers off, tossed the thermometer onto the bed, and ripped the 4-needle right out of my hand. The nurse let out a startled scream and immediately started chasing me as I bolted from the room. "Where do you think you are going?" she yelled, but I had already stepped into the hallway where I saw them. Olivia was hovering over Ethan, fussing over his clothes and asking a million questions with a look of pure adoration. It was as if he were the only person in her world. "Lucas," Olivia said when she spotted me. Her face froze for a second before she forced herself to look composed. "You have not recovered yet. So why are you wandering around like this?" I stared at her and spoke slowly, emphasizing every word. I told her I wanted an explanation as to why this was happening. I was not an idiot. I could see exactly what was going on between the two of them with just one glance. She instinctively stepped forward to shield Ethan and told me to blame her because everything had been her idea. I let out a dry laugh, but before I could speak, Ethan grabbed her arm and insisted it was not her fault, but his. He lunged toward me and grabbed my hand, forcing my fingers down onto the puncture wound on my hand that was still oozing blood. "Lucas," I fell for her first, "so if you're going to hit someone, hit me," Ethan challenged. A cold smile curled onto my lips. I jerked my hand back and delivered a sharp, stinging slap across his face. The sound of the slap echoed through the hall. Ethan staggered backward from the force of it and fell right into Olivia's arms. "Of course I want to hit you," I growled through clenched teeth. "Lucas, what is wrong with you?" Olivia screamed as she shoved me with all her might. I lost my balance and crashed onto the hospital floor. My injured hand hit the ground, causing blood to soak through the bandage instantly. She looked down at me, her voice sharp and icy. She told me that since I was gone for 3 years and we barely saw each other, it was only natural for her feelings to change. Is that so? I said as I pushed myself off the floor, my eyes locked onto hers. I asked her if that gave her the right to go running to Ethan. Out of everyone, she chose the son my parents had adopted. I reminded her that in that fire, he was the one she protected. She pulled him to safety and never once stopped to think that I was still trapped in the building. Olivia stood there in stunned silence. Ethan tried to stammer out an explanation, but the words wouldn't come. "Lucas, this is all my fault," Ethan finally said, his voice shaking. I used the wall for support as I stood up to face Olivia. I told her I didn't care who she loved, but she better not forget what she owed me. I made it clear that I intended to take back every single thing that belonged to me. Her face went pale in an instant. Before I left for my research, I was the one who secured a major deal for her. I invested my own money for a 5% stake in her startup. The contract was official, yet I had not seen a single cent in dividends since then. Emotions are unreliable, but the money on the balance sheet is the only thing that will never betray me. Ethan understood my meaning immediately, and his eyes welled up with tears. He asked how I could be so heartless to my own family. He reminded me how hard Olivia had worked on her company and asked if I was being too cruel. I sneered at him and asked if he was serious. A man who sleeps with his own brother's fiancée has no right to call anyone else cruel. A small crowd of patients and their families had gathered in the hallway. When they heard my accusation, Ethan's face drained of all color. Olivia grabbed my arm and begged me to talk things through calmly. I shook her off and swatted her hand away. I told her she had exactly 1 week to transfer every cent she owed me. I warned her that if she didn't have the money, I would show her no mercy. I told them to get out of my sight because looking at the two of them made me sick to my stomach. Olivia opened her mouth as if she wanted to continue the argument. At that exact moment, Ethan suddenly went limp and collapsed to the floor as if he could no longer stand. She immediately dropped to help him, screaming for a doctor as she frantically tried to get him toward the emergency room. Before she disappeared, she threw a cold warning over her shoulder. She told me that if anything happened to Ethan, she would never forgive me. I felt a surge of pure rage boiling up inside me, and my vision literally turned red. I turned around, slammed my door open, and retreated back into my hospital room. The young nurse had been watching from a distance and looked at me with concern. She reminded me that I was still recovering and that getting so worked up was bad for my health. I let out a low, raspy laugh that sounded absolutely hideous. I had barely managed to survive a brush with death. I had stared death in the face, yet not one person from my so-called family bothered to come by to see if I was even still breathing. Instead, it was a nurse I didn't even know who was standing by my side, tried her best to comfort me. I gave her a small nod, grabbed my phone from the pillow, and called my lawyer immediately. For 3 years, my family had stayed in contact with me, yet not one of them had ever breathed a word about Olivia and Ethan. Now that I had stumbled into this disaster, I realized I had to start looking out for myself first. The moment my observation period was over, I discharged myself and headed straight for my parents' house. As the car pulled into the neighborhood, I spotted a very familiar car sitting in the driveway. It was Olivia's. I pushed the front door open. Everyone in the living room was sitting with their backs to me. Ethan was sitting between my parents, curled up on the sofa. He was speaking in that soft, pathetic tone that always made me want to punch something. "Mom, what if Lucas comes back and starts a scene? I'm so worried he might do something impulsive," Ethan whined. My mother smiled confidently and told him not to worry. She said she would talk to me, and if I didn't listen, she would simply ship me back overseas. Olivia spoke in a low but very serious voice. She told them that I was still demanding my share of the company dividends. On what grounds? My mother snapped. She demanded to know why I would even need that much money. Their logic was so absurd that I couldn't help but speak up. I asked them what else I would do with the money that rightfully belonged to me. The sound of my voice made all of them jump in their seats. They all whipped around at once. When my mother saw it was me, her face turned a bright, angry red. "Lucas, when did you get back? You should have called us first," she stammered. I strolled into the living room and told her I arrived right around the time she mentioned shipping me back abroad. I pointed out that since living abroad was so expensive, I obviously needed to collect my money first. I sat down across from them with a cold, lifeless smile on my face. I asked Olivia if she was here to tattle on me, or if they were all just brainstorming new ways to screw me over. My father immediately lost his temper and asked what was with my tone. He claimed no one was out to get me, and that family shouldn't be so calculating. I shot back that apparently we weren't a normal family. I asked if being family meant sharing the same woman. I turned to Ethan and asked if every other woman on earth had died, leaving him with no choice but to go after mine. Ethan's eyes filled with tears instantly, and he looked like he was on the verge of a breakdown. My mother stepped in front of him and scolded me for my attitude. She reminded me that I was the one who chose my career over my relationship and decided to stay away for 3 years. She yelled at me, wondering how she could have ever raised such an ungrateful son. My father pointed a finger at me and called me arrogant. He claimed Olivia's family never liked me anyway, and that he was the one who decided Ethan should take my place. He told me both families had already reached an agreement and that the matter was settled, so I should stop causing trouble. He said it so casually, as if he were just talking about picking up some groceries on the way home for dinner. That blatant favoritism finally crushed every last bit of hope I had for this family. If that was how they wanted to play it, I was more than happy to burn the whole thing down. I asked him if they really didn't like me. I reminded him that Olivia's family didn't seem to have any complaints when I was pouring my money into her company. It was funny how their entire attitude changed the second I stepped onto that plane to go overseas. I turned my attention back to Olivia. I told her she could either pay me back every single cent she owed me, or I would expose this whole sordid affair to the public, and we could see whose reputation took the biggest hit. "Lucas, what is wrong with you?" my father roared as he slammed his hand on the table and lunged at me to strike. I stepped aside and raised my bandaged left hand to block his path. I asked them just how far their favoritism went. I was the only one actually injured in that fire, yet not one of them had even bothered to ask if I was in pain. A flicker of guilt crossed my mother's face. She admitted they had been negligent this time around. She argued that I seemed fine now, and that since Ethan was more fragile and things were chaotic, they just hadn't been thinking clearly. Ethan looked at me with his bloodshot eyes and accused me of always competing with him ever since we were kids. He claimed I always had to be the best at everything, whether it was school or sports, just to prove I was smarter than him. He told me that love wasn't a competition and that he and Olivia knew they had hurt me. He said I could have anything I wanted, even offering to get on his knees and beg for my forgiveness. He told me he would do whatever it took as long as it helped me get over my anger. I stared at him with a completely blank expression and just waited to see if he would actually do it. Ethan clearly didn't expect me to take him up on the offer, and he looked completely trapped by his own words. The silence stretched on until the tension in the room was unbearable. Then, he started swaying as if he were about to pass out. I sneered and told him that if he couldn't follow through, he shouldn't make promises he couldn't keep. I turned and walked upstairs, having completely given up on ever finding a home in that house. Once I was back in my room, I saw that my lawyer had just sent over the documents I needed. Olivia's company had actually done quite well over the last 3 years. According to our original agreement and my initial investment, she owed me a staggering $2 million. That kind of money was more than enough to ensure my future was very secure. The catch was that if I pulled all that capital out now, it would completely drain her company's cash flow. She betrayed me, and I was going to make sure the price she paid was a heavy one. I finished packing my bags and zipped them shut. Suddenly, the door swung open. Ethan walked into the room with his previous weak act completely gone. He had his arms crossed and a smug, mocking grin on his face. "Lucas, aren't you even a little curious why things turned out this way?" he asked. He asked me why I thought our parents loved the adopted son so much more than their biological one. Honestly, I was curious, but I knew better than to believe a single word that came out of his mouth. I asked him if he was here to get on his knees. If not, I told him to get the hell out of my room. He let out a low, chilling laugh and told me it was because he was actually their biological son. That statement hit me like a ton of bricks. I frowned, wondering if he had finally lost his mind. Ethan's voice dropped to a whisper, and he became deadly serious. He told me that when he was a kid, our parents' business was just starting out, and they had a lot of dangerous rivals. There was a constant threat that he would be kidnapped for ransom. He explained that they had staged the adoption as a cover and legally placed him under the names of other relatives. Then, they adopted me to serve as a distraction. It made everything look perfectly normal to the outside world, and no one would ever suspect their real son was hidden in plain sight. He leaned in close with a toxic grin. He told me that from the moment I was born, I was destined to be nothing more than his shield. That was the only reason I even existed. A wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to grab the edge of the table to steady myself. I suddenly remembered a car accident from when we were children. I had been hit by a car and was lying on the ground, covered in blood and unable to move. My parents had panicked at first, but after only a few seconds, they stopped looking at me. They grabbed Ethan and started desperately comforting him, their faces pale with terror, even though he wasn't the one who was hurt. Looking back now, all those scattered memories started to form a horrifying pattern. I wondered if my pain was just acceptable collateral damage to them. Was I really not their son? Seeing the look on my face, Ethan leaned in even closer. He told me that my entire life, from start to finish, had been one big joke. He told me women were the least of my concerns. He claimed that if he wanted me dead, our parents would just have to ask, and I would probably go along with it without even flinching. He asked if I believed him. He took another step toward me and suddenly pulled a small folding knife out of his sleeve. "Ethan, don't do this. I know you hate me, but please calm down. Stay back." He suddenly started screaming at the top of his lungs, acting as if I were the one threatening him. "What are you doing?" I asked as I instinctively backed away to create some distance between us. A second later, he flipped his wrist in one quick, clean motion. Ethan slashed the knife across his own arm, and blood immediately started gushing from the wound. Then he shoved the knife into my hand and collapsed onto the floor. Before I could even process what was happening, the door was kicked open. My parents rushed into the room. The second my father saw the scene, he stepped forward and delivered a brutal slap across my face. "You animal," my mother shrieked. She asked me if I was insane and how I could possibly do something so horrific. She threw herself at Ethan and pulled him into her arms. She kept calling him her baby and asking if he was okay or if he was in pain. Ethan was sobbing, but he managed to shoot me a smug, triumphant look from the floor. "Mom, it is not his fault," he whimpered. He told her that I could hurt him however I wanted and he wouldn't mind. His act of being the humble, selfless victim was absolutely nauseating. They had just left me to die in a fire without a second thought, and now they were putting on this big, dramatic performance right in front of me. I felt a ball of fire in my chest that was about to burn right through my skin. My father was shaking with rage as he pointed toward the door and roared at me to get out of the house. He told me that from that moment on, I was never allowed to set foot in his house again. I looked up at them with eyes that were as cold as ice. I asked them if they were really not even going to ask for my side of the story. I couldn't believe they were just taking his word for it. "Lucas, when is this going to end?" my mother screamed. She told me that the moment I returned, I had turned their lives upside down. She asked me why I even bothered coming back at all. She told me to get out and to do it immediately. I was shaking uncontrollably and felt like there was something stuck in my throat. It took a long time before I could force any words out. I told them they were absolutely right. I finally realized that I was only born to serve as a human shield for Ethan. I turned to Ethan and told him that he had one. I told him he could keep the house and that he could have our biased parents all to himself as well. I made it clear that I didn't want any part of them anymore. The cold, distant look in my eyes caught them both off guard for a moment. Ethan clutched his arm and sobbed, telling me that as long as I was happy, he didn't care. He added that saying things like that would really hurt our parents' feelings. He turned to our parents and begged them to let me stay, pointing out that I was also injured. My mother's expression hardened instantly. She told Ethan to forget about me and insisted on looking at his hand first. She referred to me as a little animal. My father pointed to the staff and security and told them to keep a close eye on me. He ordered them not to let me take a single item from the house, not even a piece of thread. He declared that from that moment on, I was no longer his son. He shoved me out the door and slammed it shut. At that moment, I felt my heart turn into a solid block of ice. From that second on, I was completely finished with that house and the Harrison name. I turned and walked away without looking back, even though my feet were shaking with every step. Ethan had put on quite a show, and my parents had been all too happy to fall for it. It was clear that in their eyes, I was nothing more than an unnecessary afterthought. I suddenly realized I had absolutely nowhere to go. I had just returned to the country and had nothing but my phone and the clothes on my back. I pulled out my phone and called my old mentor, Professor Sterling. I asked him if the university could find me a bed in a dorm for a while. 3 years ago, he was the one who recommended me for the overseas program. He had insisted that it would be a waste of my talent if I didn't pursue further research. Ever since I announced my return, he had been emailing me constantly, trying to get me to join his new research team. I gave him a brief summary of how my family had just kicked me out onto the street. There was a long silence on the other end of the line before he finally spoke. "Lucas, there is only one way to truly escape someone else's control over your life," he told me. He told me that I had to make myself strong enough that they could never touch me again. He reminded me that I was my own person and not just a substitute or a shield for someone else. He told me to come back because he was short-staffed and had plenty of grant money to make sure I was well compensated. I hung up and called an Uber, telling the driver to take me straight to the university laboratory. The moment I arrived at the entrance, a young woman was there to meet me. "Hello, you must be Lucas," she said. She introduced herself as Tessa Sterling, the professor's daughter. She explained that her father was in a meeting and had asked her to help me get settled in. She was quite tall and gestured for me to follow her as she led the way. I gave her a small nod and followed close behind her. She asked me how my hand was doing. I looked down at my hand and noticed a few fresh drops of blood beginning to soak through the gauze. I told her it wasn't my blood. Tessa looked surprised, but didn't push for more information. She led me across campus toward a nearby apartment building. She told me the apartment had been assigned to her, but she assured me she didn't actually live there. She explained the previous tenant had just moved out and the place had been professionally cleaned, so I could move in right away. She placed a set of keys into the palm of my hand. She told me her father considered me a top-tier talent and was determined to make sure I stayed with the team. She told me to let her know if I needed anything at all. I managed to force a small smile and suggested we exchange contact information. Tessa pulled out her phone, and we added each other on WhatsApp. She gave me a quick tour of the area before leaving me alone to enjoy the peace and quiet of the apartment. The second the door closed, I collapsed onto the sofa. I leaned my head back and closed my eyes, letting my mind go completely blank. When I was a child, I used to be so incredibly jealous of Ethan. He could crawl into our mother's lap whenever he wanted, and he was allowed to cry or throw tantrums however he pleased. But whenever I tried to get close to her, Ethan would either get jealous immediately or fly into a rage. In the beginning, I used to fight back. I would ask him through my tears why he was acting like that. I would ask him why our mother treated me so differently than she treated him. My mother's response was always the same. She told me that Ethan was fragile and that I had to let him have his way. Even though he was the older brother, I was the one who always had to give in. We had a massive argument once where he got so worked up that he suddenly collapsed and started convulsing on the floor. My mother was terrified and immediately rushed him to the hospital. When they got back, she dragged me out and gave me the most brutal beating of my entire life. Later on, when no one was looking, I saw Ethan clutching his chest and acting weak while sticking his tongue out at me. That entire fainting episode had been nothing but an act from start to finish. From that day on, I couldn't even stand to be near him without feeling physically ill. I finally understood why everything had happened the way it did. The whole thing was so absurd that it was almost funny. I realized there was no reason for me to let their mistakes define the rest of my life. If Ethan wanted to spend his whole life acting, I was more than happy to let him have the entire stage to himself. I took a deep breath to calm myself down and started scrolling through my social media feeds. Before long, a news story about the hotel fire popped up on my feed. I clicked on it to get a better look at the details. The security footage was from inside the building. On the screen, I could see Olivia and my parents flanking Ethan and shielding him as they ran toward the exit. About 10 feet behind them, I was lying on the ground. I was just staring at their retreating backs with a look of absolute shock and despair on my face. However, the comment section was surprisingly full of nothing but praise for them. People were commenting on how lucky the guy was to have his entire family protecting him like that. Others remarked that he was clearly a very loved and precious son who would never lack for affection. Some even said they were jealous and wished they could be reborn into a family just like that one. One person commented that they actually knew him and that he had been a classmate in college. They added that he was the adopted son of the Harrisons, but his parents treated him even better than their biological child. As the video went viral, Ethan's online popularity began to skyrocket. He decided to capitalize on the attention by posting a selfie video of his own. In the video, his arm was heavily bandaged, and he looked into the camera with a very gentle expression. He thanked everyone for their concern and well wishes. He claimed he was very lucky to have grown up surrounded by so much love from his parents. He said he would always be grateful for everything they had sacrificed for him over the years. He confirmed that he was indeed the adopted son of the Harrison family, just as people were saying. He mentioned that there had been some recent unpleasantness in the family because of his younger brother. He claimed that I had made a mistake and that our parents had already disciplined me for it. He said he just hoped that if I saw the video, I would reach out to him. He told me that our parents still loved me and begged me to stop being so stubborn. In just a few sentences, he managed to paint himself as the perfect, caring older brother while making me look like an unreasonable, rebellious child. The comment section was immediately flooded with people feeling sorry for him. People were commenting on how incredibly kind and gentle he seemed to be. Others wondered what was wrong with me for abandoning such a wonderful family. They couldn't believe anyone would run away when they had such a great brother. Some people even offered to help find me if he would just post a picture of what I looked like. Everyone was curious about what kind of mistake I had made to cause such a serious situation. Someone asked how his arm had been injured in the first place. Ethan responded to that final comment himself. He claimed that I hadn't done it on purpose and that I really shouldn't be blamed for it. That one sentence was enough to set the entire internet off on a crusade for justice. People were shocked to realize I was the one who had hurt him and said it explained why he mentioned I had made a mistake. They were horrified that I would use a knife on my own family and worried about what I might be capable of in the future. Some people commented on how sick and twisted my mind must be. They argued that even if we weren't biological brothers, there was no excuse for such an attack. People were calling me an ungrateful prick and telling the family to just cut ties with me already. I scrolled through the comments, watching as total strangers who had never even met me took turns acting as my judge and jury. It was so beyond ridiculous that it actually made me start laughing. I decided that if this was the script Ethan wanted to go with, I would give him exactly what he asked for. I figured I might as well give his story a little nudge to help it along. I liked his video and left a very public comment for everyone to see. I wrote that the biggest mistake of my life was being born into a family with a brother like him. I asked him if he was enjoying the show he had staged all by himself. The second I posted it, people started replying. Someone asked if I was the brother everyone was talking about. Others were dying to know what I meant by him staging the whole thing and begged for more details. Some people demanded that I post some real evidence instead of just talking trash. It didn't take long for the amateur internet sleuths to spring into action. The same college classmate who had identified Ethan in the first video popped up again. Someone managed to track down my identity and pointed out that I was the one lying on the floor in the surveillance footage. People started noticing that I looked pretty badly injured in the video as well. Someone agreed that after taking another look, I did seem to be in a pretty bad state. They pointed out that in his video, Ethan had claimed he just wanted me to come home and apologize. But they told everyone to actually look at the fire footage and see the look of pure despair on my face when they abandoned me. Someone commented that if that had happened to them, they would have given up on their family too. However, some people still argued that being abandoned wasn't a good enough reason to stab my own brother. Others started questioning if there was actually any proof that I was the one who had attacked him. A few people decided to hold off on judging until more information came out, since internet stories often change. One person suggested that if two brothers were fighting like this, it was probably due to how their parents had raised them. That comment immediately gathered a lot of likes and support from other users. Ethan noticed that the tide was starting to turn, so he quickly deleted my comment. It was already too late because I had already taken a screenshot of everything. That original surveillance video was the perfect weapon to use to expose his lies. If you watch the footage closely, you could see that while everyone else was rushing for the exit, Ethan was the only one who turned back to look at me. In that one frame, he was looking right at me while I was on the floor, and he actually had a smug, triumphant grin on his face. I decided to post that specific screenshot for everyone to see. The sharp-eyed sleuths on the internet began comparing different photos and angles from the scene of the fire. Eventually, the consensus was that Ethan had clearly seen me on the ground but chose to ignore me so he could enjoy being the center of the family's attention. I spent my time in the hospital bed watching the drama of my own family's scandal unfold online. I have to admit, watching them get exposed was incredibly satisfying. Before long, someone had pieced together the entire timeline of events. People summarized that while I was abroad for 3 years, my older brother had started an affair with my fiancée. They noted how the entire family had treated me like garbage and then literally left me to die in a fire. It seemed absurd to them that I was the one in the hospital with no visitors, while Ethan was perfectly fine but getting all the sympathy. My family treated him like royalty, while my cheating ex-fiancée was still refusing to pay me back the massive amount of money she owed me. All of these comments began to cast a dark shadow over the perfect image Ethan had worked so hard to create. Olivia quickly stepped in to try and do some damage control. She claimed that all the rumors were false and that she and I had broken up long before I ever went overseas. She insisted that Ethan was not a homewrecker and had done nothing wrong. She even suggested that if my own parents didn't like me, people should really stop and think about what kind of person I must be. I actually laughed out loud when I read her post. She and Ethan really were perfect for each other since they were both world-class experts at lying to themselves. I was just about to close the app when a new message notification popped up on WhatsApp. It was from Ethan, saying that Olivia only said those things to try and save the family's reputation. He reminded me that even though our parents kicked me out, I was still a Harrison, and surely I didn't want my own name dragged through the mud too. He asked me if I was really okay with the whole world thinking I was the one who had caused all the trouble. I quickly typed back a very blunt message telling him where he could shove his concerns. Ethan replied almost instantly, clearly furious. He threatened to call the police and said that since I had stabbed him, I wouldn't be able to get away with it. I told him to go right ahead and that I would be waiting for them. After I sent that, I immediately blocked his number. Right after that, my phone started vibrating like crazy as my parents took turns trying to call me. I didn't even bother to look at the screen. I declined every call, blocked their numbers, and then deleted them from my contacts entirely. From that moment on, I was officially done with the Harrison family for good. If they thought they could scare me by threatening my reputation, they were dead wrong. I had originally considered sitting down with Olivia to negotiate getting my money back. But since she decided to go online and use me as a stepping stone, I decided there was no reason to play nice anymore. I went straight to the second largest shareholder in her company and negotiated a price to sell off all of my shares. If Olivia was going to make my life difficult, I was going to make sure I got what was mine first. From the next day on, I spent every waking moment buried in the lab. For an entire week, I did nothing but work at the lab bench or crash in my apartment to catch up on sleep. My life was reduced to those two simple things. I would run into Tessa occasionally in the hallways or the equipment room. As one of the professor's PhD students, she was just as busy as I was. Since we were on the same project, we quickly fell into a rhythm and became great partners. A week later, Olivia finally called me. I had blocked every other member of the Harrison family, but I left her unblocked just to see what kind of games they were still trying to play. She asked to meet up, and I agreed immediately. We decided on a coffee shop right near the campus. I got there a bit early. When she walked in a few minutes later, she had a very conflicted look on her face. She told me that she had been forced to say those things online. She reminded me that Ethan was fragile and claimed she was only trying to keep him from having another episode. She took a deep breath and tried to look as sincere as possible. She admitted that she knew she had treated me badly. She said that the company was her life's work and reminded me that I was the one who helped build it in the first place. She argued that if I pulled my funding now, the entire project would fail, and she asked if I could really live with myself if that happened. I told her very bluntly that I could live with it just fine. I informed her that it was too late anyway because I had already sold all of my shares. She stood there in shock for a few seconds before her face twisted with anger. She told me to stop joking around. I asked her why she thought I would be joking. I told her we were well past the point of making jokes about our futures. I told her the shares were sold to Mr. Henderson and that the money was already in my bank account. I stood up and grabbed my coat, telling her I needed to get back to the lab if she didn't have anything else to say. Olivia just stared at me as she finally realized that I truly had no intention of cutting her any slack. "Lucas, you are heartless," she whispered. I told her we were even. I said that for everything I had suffered, they were going to have to pay me back twice as much. She ground her teeth together so hard her jaw looked tight and her knuckles turned white as she gripped her bag. She told me that was fine and said we would see how I explained myself to the police. It turned out that Ethan actually had called the police. He had even posted a video online where he swore that our parents were going to finally teach me a lesson. By the time I arrived at the police station, he was already there, looking incredibly smug. My parents were standing right behind him like they were there to protect the victim. The second my mother saw me, she put on an act of being pained and helpless. She asked me why I couldn't just return the money and end all of this. She suggested I invest the money back into the company since Olivia was basically family now. She begged me not to make things so ugly between us. My father stood beside her with his usual air of superiority. He remarked that spending 3 years abroad had certainly made me more arrogant. He told me to just apologize and that they would let the whole thing go. I looked at them and told Mr. and Mrs. Harrison that they were completely mistaken about the situation. I made it clear that from now on, the law would be the one to decide how things were handled. Since Ethan had chosen to file a false police report and accuse me of stabbing him, I told them I had no intention of letting it go. My words left them stunned, and their faces went through a kaleidoscope of angry colors. My father was just about to explode, but I brushed past them and walked straight into the back office. Ethan immediately held up his bandaged arm for the officer to see as the tears started rolling down his face. I felt a wave of pure disgust wash over me. I asked him how old he was and if crying was really the only trick he had left. Ethan looked hurt and asked how I could say something like that. He insisted it was a fact that I had slashed him. I rolled my eyes and asked him if he thought the police were blind. I pointed out that anyone could tell the difference between a self-inflicted wound and one caused by someone else. Ethan started sobbing even harder, his face covered in tears and snot. He accused me of hating him and always saying he was just acting or faking being sick. He asked how anyone could think he was capable of doing something so terrible. My mother rushed over and pulled Ethan into a tight embrace. She looked at me and told me she truly regretted ever giving birth to me. I told Mrs. Harrison that while she was busy with her regrets, she should know that I regretted having her, as a mother, even more. I turned to the police officer and asked if filing a false report and maliciously slandering someone carried legal consequences. The officer looked at me seriously and told me not to jump to conclusions if I didn't have any evidence. He noted that the wound was already starting to scab over and said a forensic evaluation would take time. I told him that wouldn't be necessary and pulled my phone out of my pocket. I informed him that I had brought the evidence with me. Ethan's face drained of color in an instant. I hit play on a video for everyone to see. He could only point at me and stammer as he watched the screen. I reminded everyone that I had said from the very beginning that the whole thing was a stage performance. I explained that on that day, I had only gone upstairs to pack my things and move out. I told them I decided to record a video before I left as a sort of final memento of the house. I said I never expected to capture his entire little drama on camera. My parents were standing behind me, looking completely mortified. It was clear they never imagined Ethan would go that far. Yet even with the truth in front of them, the look they gave me was still filled with resentment and anger. My mother asked how I could possibly record a video in secret like that. She even tried to claim that Ethan was probably just playing a joke on me. Exactly, Lucas, my father added. I cut them off and told the officer I wanted to file an official report. I made it clear that I had no intention of settling this out of court. I looked coldly at my so-called family. I reminded them that Ethan had smeared my name online and incited a mob of people to harass me. I told them I had complete evidence of every single thing he had done. I had been incredibly busy in a lab lately, but I had already instructed my lawyer to document and organize every bit of online harassment according to a timeline. Seeing how well prepared I was, Ethan completely lost his composure. He went pale and looked like he was about to pull his old trick of fainting again. I stared him down, silently daring him to try faking a faint this time. I told him it was funny because his physical from last month said he was in perfectly good health. My voice went cold as I told them that no matter what they said, I was not going to settle this privately. Lucas, he is your brother, my mother screamed, hoping the reminder of our bond would make me back down. I simply shook my head and remained firm, gesturing for my lawyer to take over the rest of the process. The police took Ethan into custody right then and there to begin a formal investigation. As soon as I stepped out of the station, I was swarmed by a crowd of reporters and independent media bloggers. I didn't waste any time. I simply airdropped the original video to all of them and told them to see the truth for themselves. The internet exploded once again. People were commenting that with acting like that, the Academy should have a seat waiting for him at the Oscars. Others remarked on how manipulative he was, calling him a natural-born sociopath. People were starting to realize that his acting was probably a regular occurrence in that family. Some users commented on how exhausting it must have been to grow up in a household like that. People were outraged that even with video evidence, my parents were still trying to convince me to let it go. Many expressed sympathy, saying they couldn't imagine how much I had been forced to endure over the years. One person commented that being kicked out of that house might actually be the best thing that ever happened to me. Some suggested the whole family should just be locked away so everyone else could be safe from them. Many predicted that my life would be 1,000 times better now that I was free from them. Someone else pointed out the irony in Ethan's previous sob story. They reminded everyone that Ethan had claimed the fake adoption was necessary to protect him from the family's many business enemies. The user asked how massive a company would have to be for people to actually be plotting assassinations against the family. They pointed out the absurdity of a company being that important, yet unable to afford a single decent bodyguard. I actually laughed out loud when I read that specific comment. They were absolutely right. The Harrison family business was a mid-sized company at best. It was nowhere near important enough to justify some elaborate kidnapping and body double plot. I couldn't help but smile. I realized that none of this was my fault. Ethan had personally destroyed the perfect older brother image that they had worked so hard to maintain. Of course, my parents still treated him like he was the most precious thing in the world. Someone bailed him out pretty quickly, but there was no dodging the criminal charges or the lawsuit this time. Panicked, Ethan began put immense pressure on Olivia to marry him immediately. I was leaving the lab one evening when I saw Olivia waiting for me right by the entrance. "Lucas," she said, her voice sounding incredibly strained. She told me that she knew I still had feelings for her. She claimed everything I was doing was just to get revenge on Ethan and force her to come back to me. She said she would agree to my terms and marry me. It was true that before I left, we had planned to get married as soon as I returned. But after everything that had happened, I couldn't believe she had the nerve to think I'd still be waiting for her. I didn't say a word. I just raised my hand and slapped her twice, once on each cheek. The force of the slaps knocked her head to the side, and her face immediately began to swell. "It is okay," she whispered as she turned back to look at me. She told me I could keep hitting her because she deserved it. She even had the audacity to ask if I had hurt my hand hitting her. I let out a mocking laugh that was dripping with sarcasm. I asked her if she didn't own any mirrors at home. I asked her if she really thought she was worth a single second of my time. I pointed toward Tessa, who happened to be walking out of the lab building with a group of other students. I asked her if she saw the woman standing over there. I told her she was beautiful, brilliant, came from a great family, and most importantly, she was loyal. I gestured toward the other female grad students standing nearby. I told her to take a good look at all of them. I noted how smart, energetic, and genuine they all were. The students caught on to what was happening immediately and decided to play along. "Professor Lucas looks so good today," one of them chirped. Another girl said those slaps were so cool they gave her chills. One of them asked if she was the famous cheater from the internet. They wondered how she could be shameless enough to show her face at the university after what she did. Someone remarked that she looked like the literal definition of a toxic person. They asked me how someone like her could ever be good enough for me. The women continued their commentary, making sure that Olivia heard every single word they said. Olivia's face flushed with embarrassment and anger as she stared at me. She asked if I was actually being serious. I told her that she and Ethan were a perfect match and deserve each other. I suggested they lock themselves away for the rest of their lives so they couldn't hurt anyone else. I told her to get lost right now. I warned her that if she ever showed her face near me again, I would slap her again. She finally turned and ran away, covering her face and moving as fast as her legs could carry her. Once she was gone, I turned to the students and apologized for using them like that. I admitted that using them as a shield was a bit out of line. I promised to take them all out to dinner as a way to make it up to them. The students laughed and said they didn't want to be third wheels. They joked that they didn't want to get in the way of my potential date with Tessa. They waved goodbye and hurried off, laughing among themselves. They scattered in an instant, leaving only Tessa and me standing there. She cleared her throat and said she could understand the comment about her being pretty since she was confident in her looks. She guessed that my rich comment was probably because of the apartment she was letting me stay in. She admitted that I was technically correct on that point, but she wanted to know how I could possibly know if she was loyal or not. She pointed out that she had never actually mentioned anything about her loyalty to me. I felt my face flush with embarrassment and muttered that I had just said it in the heat of the moment. I told her I figured that anyone my professor trusted enough to keep around must be a person of good character. Tessa laughed and admitted that I was certainly right about that. She told me that as for her loyalty, I would just have to find out for myself over time. I was caught off guard by her comment. She reminded me that I owed her a dinner as payment for helping me deal with my ex. She smoothly changed the subject and kept the conversation moving. Since I was living in her apartment, I agreed that taking her out to dinner was the least I could do. Tessa picked out a small, quiet restaurant for us to go to. I couldn't believe Olivia still hadn't given up. She was sitting in her car across the street, staring at our table through the window. There was a time when that look of longing in her eyes would have made my heart race. Now it just made me feel exhausted, and I had no interest in playing her games anymore. Tessa took charge and ordered for both of us before handing the menus back to the waiter. She ordered braised short ribs with creamy risotto and a side of pan-seared salmon, which were all of my favorite things. I looked at her in surprise, and Tessa caught my expression and offered an explanation. She reminded me that I had eaten at her house once a long time ago. She told me those were all her mother's signature dishes. She remembered that I had cleaned my plate that night without leaving a single bite. I suddenly remembered how Professor Sterling used to invite his students over. His wife was always so kind and seemed to make those same dishes every time. I had always cleared my plate as if I were eating at my own family's table. She told me that her mother still mentioned me every time she went home for a visit. Apparently, her mother loved how I always finished my food because it made her feel like she was actually a great chef. I felt a warm glow in my chest at the thought of her mother's kindness. I told her that her mother was a wonderful person and a truly talented cook. I mentioned that back at my house, the meals were only ever made to suit Ethan's specific tastes. I told her that no one in my family had ever once bothered to ask what I liked to eat. "Lucas, you are a good man," Tessa said softly. She told me to stop having such a low opinion of myself. She pointed out that if I were really as bad as they claimed, people online would have torn me apart long ago. But the truth was that they hadn't. She said that spoke volumes about who I really was. Her words were like a splash of cold water that suddenly pulled me out of the dark cloud I had been living in. I realized she was right, and that I wasn't the bad guy in this story. I had chosen to fight back, and there were actually people who were willing to stand by me. I asked myself why I was still letting a few toxic people from my past have so much power over me. I thanked her in a quiet voice. Tessa laughed and told me not to thank her. She told me that we were friends. She said we were the kind of friends who would both find success in the end. She told me not to let irrelevant people drag me down with them. She said the people who couldn't see my worth were the ones who were truly missing out. I felt a massive weight lift off my shoulders. When I looked back out the window, the car across the street was finally gone. It seemed like Olivia was much more fragile than I had realized. After dinner, Tessa drove me back to my apartment. As we pulled up, I saw my parents standing by the entrance to the building, waiting for me. I wondered if they were staging some kind of group ambush. "Lucas, it is all my fault." My mother started, her voice already breaking. She tried to speak, but the words seemed to get stuck in her throat. I took a deep breath and tried to push down the familiar ache in my chest. I asked them if they were there to beg for mercy for Ethan. I told them that if they were wasting their time because I wasn't backing down. "No, that is not it," she said as she grabbed my hand. She told me they were sorry for the way they had treated me over the years. She claimed she had already given Ethan a severe scolding. She said she had come to apologize in person and admit that she was wrong. "Is that so?" I asked coldly. I asked her exactly how she had disciplined him. I asked if she had just grounded him for a few days. I asked if she had finally found the courage to actually kick him out of the house. I let out a short, cold laugh that was devoid of any warmth. I pointed out that if it hadn't been for that video, they would have happily watched me get sent to prison without a second thought. She was immediately silenced by the truth. My father stood there, still trying to maintain his air of authority. He asked me why I had to be so difficult. He claimed they were trying to be reasonable while I was being overly aggressive. He told me he always knew my temper would make it impossible for me to ever fit into any family. He said that no one would ever want a son like me. "I wouldn't be so sure about that," Tessa interrupted. Tessa stepped forward and stood right by my side. She told them that Lucas was an exceptional person. She described me as being steady, caring, brilliant, and ambitious. She told them that everyone in the laboratory had nothing but good things to say about me. She said it was only the few of them who seemed to think I wasn't good enough. She lifted her chin and kept going. She informed them that the project I was working on was a major federal initiative. She said I was operating at a level of success they couldn't even begin to fathom. My father gave her a look of pure contempt and asked who she thought she was. I introduced her as Tessa Sterling, my mentor's daughter. I told them it was time for them to leave. My mother's attitude completely shifted in an instant. She pushed past me and put on a bright, welcoming smile. "Oh, so you're Professor Sterling's daughter," she gushed. She tried to invite Tessa inside for a drink. I told Mr. and Mrs. Harrison that they could stop right there. I reminded them that the apartment actually belonged to Tessa. I pointed out that it wasn't their place to be inviting people into her home. Furthermore, I told them quite clearly that I never wanted to see them again. I ordered them to leave immediately, or I would be forced to call security. I turned to Tessa and apologized for dragging her into my family drama. She told me it was no problem and followed me right into the building. My parents tried to follow us, but the security guard blocked their path. They could only stand on the sidewalk fuming with rage, completely powerless to do anything about it. I was all too familiar with that look on their faces. Despite all the years that had passed, they hadn't changed a bit. Ethan's place in their hearts was clearly unshakable. The only reason they were acting humble today was because Ethan was actually facing the possibility of prison time. I knew Olivia's family wouldn't be happy about their daughter marrying a man with a criminal record. That was the only thing that was actually causing them any real distress. Once we were upstairs, Tessa showed me her phone and told me her number. She told me to call her if I ever needed anything. She made me promise not to be afraid of bothering her. I agreed. After that night, they finally stopped bothering me. Just as I thought, Olivia's family eventually gave their approval for the wedding. I was a little surprised when I first heard the news. Then I found out the real reason was that Olivia was pregnant. I assumed someone had advised Ethan that a baby would be the perfect way to permanently tie himself to her family. No matter what they were up to, I had no intention of stopping the legal proceedings against him. I moved forward with the prosecution, and I didn't care one bit who he was marrying or what he was doing with his life. If he ended up in prison, it was entirely his own fault. If Olivia's family was okay with their grandson's father being a criminal, that was their business and had nothing to do with me. A friend of mine eventually filled me in on all the details. There was no big wedding or fancy ring. They just went to the courthouse and signed some papers to make it official. My friend laughed as he told me how miserable Ethan had looked that day. He said Ethan spent the whole time complaining about how things were being handled. Apparently, Olivia just gave him a cold look and told him to either sign the papers or get the hell out. He backed down instantly and started apologizing to her right then and there. My friend remarked that Ethan's tears were worthless since he could turn them on and off like a faucet. He called Ethan a world-class actor. I asked him how he managed to get so much information. He laughed and told me that another couple at the courthouse had recorded the whole scene and posted it on the internet. He said the video was taken down pretty fast, probably because Olivia's family used their influence to hide it. Luckily, he had managed to save a copy of it before it disappeared. He sent the video over for me to see for myself. I watched it and simply remarked that it seemed like they got exactly what they deserved. I said that since this was the outcome he wanted, he should be happy his dream had finally come true. Later, I found out from my friend that Olivia had ended up losing the baby. I assumed the constant stress of my legal case hanging over them had taken a toll on her health. Every time Ethan showed even the slightest bit of frustration, she would immediately accuse him of cheating, and they would get into endless arguments. Eventually, their verbal fights turned physical. He hit her in a fit of rage, and she responded by getting a restraining order against him. Her family was absolutely furious and threatened to throw him out of their lives for good. Of course, Ethan refused to leave without a fight because he was determined to get a piece of their money. They ended up in a massive legal battle where neither side was willing to back down. In her rage, Olivia even tried to use her family's connections to go after my parents' company. She had forgotten that she no longer had any influence over that company. The board of directors quickly removed her from her position, and she lost her seat entirely. Her professional career was essentially over at that point. In a twisted way, her dream of being with her first love and facing the world together had finally come true. I just hoped the two of them would stay trapped in their own disaster and continue to make each other miserable for the rest of their lives. As for me, my career continued to reach new heights, and my life became better than ever. I was finally living life on my own terms, and it was absolutely wonderful. This story is not about family betrayal or lost love. It is about the moment you realize that the people who were supposed to protect you have been using you as a shield their entire lives. Ethan spent years believing he was the difficult one, the ungrateful son, the brother who could never measure up. But the truth was far crueler. He was never the problem. He was simply the decoy, the placeholder, the one born to absorb the risks so his brother could stay safe. When he finally uncovered the lie, he did not collapse. He walked away. He rebuilt his life not with anger, but with proof, evidence and videos, contracts, and cold hard data. The lesson here is painful but clear. Blood does not always mean family, and loyalty is not always rewarded. Sometimes the only person you can truly count on is yourself. But that is not a tragedy. It is a beginning. Ethan did not need their love to survive. He needed his own mind, his own work, and the quiet courage to walk out the door and never look back. And in the end, the best revenge is not destruction. It is building a life so full, so peaceful, and so successful that the people who abandoned you become nothing more than a distant memory. You are not defined by who rejected you. You are defined by who you choose to become.